Sometimes a father's desperation leads him to places he never imagined possible. When your 7-year-old daughter needs a miracle and insurance claims become your daily nightmare, you'll cross any line, knock on any door, even if it means confronting the man whose company destroyed your family's financial future. Marcus Rivera had lost everything: his job, his savings, his wife's trust. But he hadn't lost hope. Not when little Sofia's kidneys were failing, and the transplant list stretched longer than her remaining time. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights of Valley Medical Center's pediatric wing hummed with the kind of relentless constancy that had become the soundtrack to Marcus Rivera's existence. He sat in the same plastic chair he'd occupied for the past 14 hours, watching his daughter Sofia sleep through another round of dialysis. At 7 years old, she weighed barely 43 pounds, her tiny frame dwarfed by the mechanical symphony of tubes and monitors that kept her tethered to life. Sofia had been born with polycystic kidney disease, a genetic lottery that neither Marcus nor his ex-wife Elena had seen coming. The diagnosis arrived like a demolition crew on Sofia's 3rd birthday, turning their modest but comfortable life into a cascade of medical appointments, insurance battles, and mounting debt that seemed to multiply faster than Sofia's declining kidney function. Marcus worked 2 jobs to keep up with the medical expenses. Days were spent driving delivery trucks for Peninsula Logistics, nights cleaning office buildings downtown. His hands, once soft from his previous life as an insurance claims adjuster, now bore the permanent calluses of manual labor and the faint chemical burns from industrial cleaning supplies. Sleep had become a luxury he couldn't afford, measured in stolen minutes between shifts and hospital visits. The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd once been the person on the other side of insurance claims, the bureaucrat who decided whether families like his own would receive coverage or face financial ruin. Before Sofia's diagnosis, Marcus had prided himself on his thoroughness, his ability to find reasons to deny claims that seemed excessive or questionable. He'd told himself he was protecting the system, maintaining fiscal responsibility in an industry built on calculated risk. That perspective had changed the first time he'd submitted a claim for Sofia's treatment and received a denial letter citing pre-existing conditions and experimental treatment clauses. The cold, clinical language he'd once wielded like a sword had become a noose around his own neck, strangling his family's financial future with the same precision he'd once applied to other people's desperation. Elena had tried to weather the storm, but 18 months of watching their daughter suffer while bills piled up like autumn leaves had broken something fundamental in their marriage. She'd moved out 6 months ago, taking their shared savings and leaving behind only a forwarding address and a note explaining that she couldn't watch Sofia die while they argued about money. The divorce papers had arrived the same week Sofia's doctor informed them that her kidney function had dropped below 15%. Dr. Rebecca Chen, Sofia's nephrologist, had been Marcus's anchor through the darkest moments of the ordeal. She possessed the rare combination of medical expertise and genuine compassion that made parents like Marcus feel seen rather than processed. Her explanations came without medical jargon, her prognoses delivered with honesty tempered by hope, and her treatment plans crafted with awareness that every family navigated different financial realities. Sofia needs a transplant within the next 6 months, Dr. Chen had explained during their most recent consultation, her voice gentle but firm. Her remaining kidney function is declining faster than we anticipated, and dialysis can only sustain her for so long. We've placed her on the regional transplant list, but given her blood type and size, we're looking at a potential wait of 18 to 24 months. The mathematics of the situation were brutally simple. Sofia had 6 months before her kidneys failed completely. The transplant list required 18 to 24 months. The gap between those numbers represented the difference between his daughter's life and death, and Marcus refused to accept that arithmetic. What about living donors? Marcus had asked, though he already knew the answer. He'd been tested immediately after Sofia's diagnosis and discovered that while his blood type was compatible, his kidney function showed early signs of the same genetic condition that was killing his daughter. Elena had been tested as well, but her blood type was incompatible, another genetic lottery they'd lost. Dr. Chen had explained the living donor process with the patience of someone who delivered the same information to countless desperate parents. Compatible donors could be found outside the family, But the process required extensive testing, psychological evaluation, and financial arrangements that often proved as complicated as the surgery itself. Most importantly, it required someone willing to undergo major surgery and lifelong medical monitoring for the sake of a child they might not even know. The hospital's social services department had provided Marcus with resources for finding potential donors, online registries, support groups, and advocacy organizations that specialized in connecting patients with living donors. He'd created profiles on every platform, written heartbreaking appeals that detailed Sofia's condition and their desperate circumstances, and shared their story across social media with the kind of vulnerability that would have horrified his former professional self. The responses had been overwhelming in their sympathy and heartbreaking in their limitations. Hundreds of people had shared their story. Thousands had offered prayers and emotional support, but actual volunteers for kidney donation numbered in the single digits. Of those, none had survived the initial compatibility screening, their blood types or health conditions eliminating them from consideration before they could progress to serious evaluation. Marcus had expanded his search beyond traditional channels, reaching out to community organizations, religious groups, and even placing classified advertisements in local newspapers. He'd attended support group meetings for families dealing with organ failure, hoping to connect with someone who might understand their desperation enough to consider donation. Each lead had ended in disappointment, each potential donor eliminated by medical incompatibility or personal circumstances that made surgery impossible. The financial pressure had intensified as Sofia's condition worsened. Insurance covered dialysis treatments but balked at many of the medications and supplemental therapies that might extend her time before transplant. Marcus had sold his car and now relied on public transportation and borrowed vehicles to get Sofia to her appointments. Their apartment had been downsized twice, their possessions reduced to what fit in 2 bedrooms in a complex where the elevators worked sporadically and the heating system struggled through winter months. Sofia bore her illness with the kind of resilience that simultaneously inspired and devastated Marcus. She rarely complained about the dialysis sessions that left her exhausted and nauseous, never protested the dietary restrictions that eliminated most foods a 7-year-old would want to eat, and maintained an optimism about her future that Marcus struggled to match. She drew pictures of herself playing soccer and swimming, activities her doctors had gently explained might not be possible even after a successful transplant. Her favorite activity during dialysis sessions was working on math problems that Marcus created to keep her mind occupied during the long hours connected to the machine. Sofia had inherited her mother's facility with numbers and her father's. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Stubborn persistence, attacking arithmetic with the same determination she applied to everything else in her young life. She'd progressed far beyond her grade level in mathematics, using her hospital time to explore concepts that kept her intellectually engaged, while her body struggled with fundamental biological functions. It was during one of these dialysis sessions that Marcus first heard about Alexander Whitmore. The conversation started in the hospital cafeteria, where parents of long-term pediatric patients formed an informal support network built around shared coffee and mutual desperation. Maria Santos, whose teenage son was being treated for leukemia, had mentioned reading about Whitmore in a business magazine. "He's the CEO of Meridian Pharmaceuticals," Maria had explained, stirring sugar into coffee that had long since grown cold. "Built the company from nothing into a billion-dollar operation." The article mentioned that he has a daughter about Sofia's age, who's been dealing with some kind of chronic illness. Made me wonder if he might understand what families like ours go through. Marcus had initially dismissed the suggestion. CEOs of pharmaceutical companies lived in different worlds, from delivery drivers and night janitors. The idea that someone like Alexander Whitmore would concern himself with the medical crisis of a working-class family seemed as fantastical as winning the lottery. But as Sofia's condition continued to deteriorate and conventional donor searches proved futile, Marcus found himself researching the man who controlled one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the region. Alexander Whitmore was 42 years old, a self-made entrepreneur who had built Meridian Pharmaceuticals from a small biotech startup into a major player in the industry. His company specialized in rare disease treatments, the kind of specialized medications that commanded premium prices because they addressed conditions affecting relatively small patient populations. Whitmore himself had earned a reputation as a demanding but fair employer, someone who drove his company toward innovation while maintaining ethical standards that sometimes put principle ahead of profit. The business profiles Marcus found painted a picture of a man driven by personal experience with medical crisis. Whitmore's daughter, Isabella, had been diagnosed with a rare genetic condition that required ongoing treatment with experimental medications. The experience had apparently motivated Whitmore's focus on rare disease research, his company's commitment to patient access programs, and his personal involvement in advocacy organizations that supported families dealing with chronic illness. More intriguingly, Marcus discovered that Whitmore had recently made headlines for his criticism of insurance industry practices that limited access to life-saving treatments. In a speech to a healthcare conference, Whitmore had specifically condemned the use of pre-existing condition clauses and experimental treatment exclusions to deny coverage to patients who needed specialized care. He'd argued that insurance companies prioritized profit over patient outcomes, creating artificial barriers between sick children and the treatments that could save their lives. The speech had been covered extensively in healthcare industry publications, with insurance executives dismissing Whitmore's comments as naive idealism from someone who didn't understand the economic realities of risk management. Marcus had read those responses with particular interest, recognizing the language and logic he'd once used to justify claim denials. The insurance executives were defending the same system Marcus had helped operate, the same bureaucratic machinery that was now grinding his own family into financial dust. As he learned more about Whitmore, Marcus began to see potential connections that extended beyond their shared experience of childhood illness. Whitmore had grown up in a working-class family. His father, a factory worker who'd struggled with union strikes and plant closures throughout the 1980s. The pharmaceutical executive had earned his college degree through student loans and part-time jobs, building his career through a combination of intelligence, persistence, and willingness to take risks that more privileged competitors avoided. Meridian Pharmaceuticals was headquartered in a gleaming office complex on the north side of the city, a 30-minute bus ride from the medical center where Sofia received her treatments. Marcus had driven past the building countless times during his delivery routes, noting the manicured landscaping and the luxury cars in the executive parking area. The contrast with his own circumstances had once seemed insurmountable, but desperation had a way of making impossible approaches seem merely improbable. The idea that had been forming in Marcus's mind was simultaneously simple and audacious. If Alexander Whitmore truly understood what families like theirs faced, if his criticism of insurance industry practices reflected genuine empathy rather than corporate positioning, then perhaps he might be willing to consider an extraordinary request. Not for money, which Marcus knew would be inappropriate and ineffective, but for something far more personal and significant. Marcus had spent weeks researching living kidney donation, understanding the medical procedures, recovery timelines, and long-term implications for donors. The surgery was major but relatively safe for healthy adults, with most donors returning to normal activities within 6 to 8 weeks. The psychological evaluation process was designed to ensure that donors understood the risks and were making informed decisions without coercion or unrealistic expectations. More importantly, Marcus had confirmed that Alexander Whitmore's blood type, mentioned in a magazine profile about his marathon-running hobby, was compatible with Sofia's needs. The detail had been buried in a discussion of Whitmore's athletic achievements, a casual reference to blood tests required for participation in international running events. It was the kind of information that most readers would overlook entirely, but for Marcus, it represented the first concrete sign that his desperate plan might actually be possible. The challenge was finding a way to approach Whitmore that would be neither inappropriate nor easily dismissed. Corporate executives were insulated by layers of assistance, security personnel, and communication protocols designed to filter out exactly the kind of desperate personal appeals that Marcus needed to make. Traditional channels would never work. Cold calls would be screened out by receptionists, emails would be deleted by assistants, and letters would disappear into corporate communication systems designed to protect executives from direct contact with the public. Marcus needed a different approach, something that would bypass corporate barriers and create a genuine human connection between two fathers dealing with medical crises affecting their children. The solution came to him during one of Sofia's dialysis sessions, as he watched her work through advanced mathematical problems with the focused concentration she brought to everything in her life. Alexander Whitmore was scheduled to speak at a healthcare innovation conference being held at the downtown convention center. The event was open to healthcare professionals, pharmaceutical industry representatives, and patient advocacy groups, with registration fees that would normally be beyond Marcus's budget. But the conference also offered volunteer positions for local residents who wanted to support healthcare innovation initiatives, roles that would provide access to the venue and opportunities for informal interaction with speakers and attendees. Marcus had applied for a volunteer position, submitting references from his current employers and emphasizing his personal experience with the healthcare system. The conference organizers had accepted his application, assigning him to the registration desk where he would check in attendees and provide information about session schedules and venue logistics. The position would give him legitimate access to the conference and potential opportunities to approach Whitmore in a setting that might be more conducive to personal conversation. The night before the conference, Marcus sat in Sofia's hospital room, watching her sleep while dialysis machines worked to perform the functions her kidneys could no longer manage. She looked smaller than her 7 years, her face pale against the white hospital pillows, but her expression peaceful in a way that reminded Marcus of her mother's sleeping face during happier times. He'd made his decision weeks ago, but sitting in the quiet hospital room, surrounded by the evidence of his daughter's failing health, the weight of what he was planning to ask felt overwhelming. He was going to approach a complete stranger and request that the man undergo major surgery to save Marcus's daughter's life. The request was extraordinary in its scope and intimate in its implications, asking someone to accept physical risk and lifelong medical consequences for the sake of a child they'd never met. It was the kind of appeal that sounded reasonable only in the desperate mathematics of parental love, where any sacrifice became justifiable if it might save a dying child. But Marcus had exhausted every conventional option, followed every traditional path, and found nothing but closed doors and incompatible blood types. If Alexander Whitmore said no, Marcus would accept that rejection and continue searching for alternatives. But if there was even a small chance that one father's desperation might connect with another father's compassion, then the attempt was worth making, regardless of how improbable success might seem. The morning of the healthcare conference dawned gray and cold, with the kind of November weather that made waiting at bus stops feel like endurance tests. Marcus arrived at the convention center 2 hours before the first scheduled sessions, wearing his only suit and carrying a folder of documents that told Sofia's story and medical reports, photographs, and handwritten letters from Dr. Chen explaining the urgency of her need for a transplant. The volunteer coordinator assigned Marcus to the main registration desk, where early arriving attendees would check in and receive conference materials. The position would keep him stationary for most of the day, but it also meant that every conference participant would pass through his area, including Alexander Whitmore, who was scheduled to deliver the opening keynote address at 9:30. As the convention center filled with healthcare professionals and pharmaceutical industry representatives, Marcus found himself studying faces and name badges, looking for the man whose photograph he'd memorized from dozens of online articles and corporate websites. Alexander Whitmore was described as 6 feet tall with dark hair and the kind of confident posture that came from years of commanding corporate meetings and investor presentations. The first several hours passed in a blur of routine check-ins and logistical questions, with Marcus providing directions to session rooms and information about catering schedules while watching for Whitmore's arrival. The conference attendance was larger than he'd expected, with several hundred participants representing every aspect of the healthcare industry, from researchers and physicians to insurance executives and patient advocates. It was during a brief break between registration waves that Marcus noticed a small commotion near the main entrance, where several conference organizers had gathered around a tall man in a navy suit. Alexander Whitmore had arrived, and even from a distance, Marcus could see the kind of commanding presence that had built a pharmaceutical empire from a small biotech startup. Whitmore moved through the lobby with the efficient confidence of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room, greeting organizers and acknowledging introductions with the practiced charm of executive-level networking. Marcus felt his heart rate accelerate as Whitmore approached the registration desk, flanked by 2 assistants who were clearly accustomed to managing their boss's schedule with military precision. This was the moment Marcus had been planning for weeks, the opportunity he'd volunteered for and strategized about. But facing the reality of approaching one of the most powerful men in the pharmaceutical industry made his preparation feel suddenly inadequate. Alexander Whitmore, the executive said, extending his hand to Marcus with the kind of firm handshake that suggested genuine attention rather than perfunctory courtesy. "I believe I'm on your list for the opening keynote." Marcus fumbled through the registration materials, his hands shaking slightly as he located Whitmore's name badge and conference packet. The CEO waited patiently, his expression professionally pleasant but not particularly interested in extended conversation with volunteer staff. This was Marcus's chance, perhaps his only chance, to make the kind of impression that might lead to the conversation he desperately needed to have. "Mr. Whitmore," Marcus said, his voice steadier than he'd expected, "I wonder if I might have just a moment of your time after your presentation. There's something I'd like to discuss with you, something related to your speech about insurance industry practices." Whitmore paused, his attention focusing on Marcus with the kind of sharp curiosity that had built his reputation as a CEO who paid attention to details others missed. One of his assistants stepped forward, clearly intending to deflect the request with standard corporate protocols for managing executive accessibility. "I'm sorry," the assistant began, "but Mr. Whitmore's schedule is completely booked today. If you'd like to submit a written request through our corporate communications department, someone will review it and respond appropriately." But Whitmore raised a hand to stop his assistant's intervention, his eyes remaining fixed on Marcus with an expression that suggested genuine interest rather than polite dismissal. "What specifically did you want to discuss?" he asked, his tone indicating that the quality of Marcus's answer would determine whether the conversation continued or ended. Marcus took a breath, knowing that his next words would either create an opportunity or close a door permanently. "My daughter is dying because insurance companies use the same kind of exclusions and pre-existing condition clauses that you criticized in your healthcare conference speech. I'd like to tell you about her case and ask for your advice on how families like mine can navigate a system that seems designed to deny care rather than provide it." The answer was carefully crafted to avoid mentioning kidney donation or making any specific requests that might seem inappropriate or presumptuous. Instead, Marcus had positioned himself as someone seeking guidance from an industry expert, who had publicly criticized the same system that was failing his family. The approach was honest without being manipulative, personal without being overly emotional, and specific enough to demonstrate that Marcus had actually read Whitmore's speeches rather than making generic appeals. Whitmore studied Marcus for several seconds, his expression unreadable but attentive. Around them, the conference registration process continued with the kind of background activity that provided cover for conversations that might otherwise attract unwanted attention from corporate assistants or industry observers. "What's your daughter's condition?" Whitmore asked quietly, his voice carrying the kind of parental concern that transcended professional boundaries. "Polycystic kidney disease," Marcus replied. "She's 7 years old and needs a transplant, but she's not high enough on the regional list to receive a kidney before her remaining function fails completely. We're looking at a 6-month window before dialysis becomes insufficient, but the transplant wait is projected at 18 to 24 months. Whitmore's expression shifted subtly, the professional mask of executive networking giving way to something more personal and immediate. Marcus could see recognition in the CEO's eyes, the understanding that came from personal experience with childhood medical crises, and the helpless feeling of watching insurance systems prioritize bureaucratic efficiency over patient outcomes. "After my presentation," Whitmore said, glancing at his assistants to indicate that this conversation was not subject to their scheduling oversight, "wait for me in the speaker preparation room behind the main auditorium. We'll continue this discussion privately." The opening keynote presentation had been scheduled to last 45 minutes, followed by a question-and-answer session and networking break before the first breakout sessions began. Marcus spent those 45 minutes in a state of nervous anticipation, reviewing his preparation materials and trying to organize his thoughts for a conversation that might represent Sofia's best chance at finding a compatible kidney donor. Alexander Whitmore's speech exceeded Marcus's expectations, demonstrating not just executive speaking skills, but genuine passion for healthcare reform that addressed the system's most problematic aspects. Whitmore spoke eloquently about the disconnect between medical innovation and patient access, the role of insurance industry practices in creating artificial barriers to care, and the responsibility of pharmaceutical companies to advocate for patients rather than simply maximize profits. More importantly, Whitmore's presentation included specific examples of families who had been denied coverage for life-saving treatments, cases that paralleled Sofia's situation with uncomfortable precision. The CEO spoke about children whose conditions were classified as pre-existing, patients whose treatments were deemed experimental despite proven efficacy, and families who had been forced into bankruptcy by medical expenses that insurance companies had refused to cover. The question-and-answer session revealed additional aspects of Whitmore's perspective that encouraged Marcus about the upcoming conversation. An insurance industry representative had challenged Whitmore's criticism of pre-existing condition exclusions, arguing that such policies were necessary to maintain actuarial stability and prevent adverse selection in insurance pools. Whitmore's response had been both measured and forceful, acknowledging the economic realities of insurance mathematics, while arguing that the current system prioritized statistical models over individual patient outcomes. "We have a moral obligation," Whitmore had said, "to ensure that children don't die because their illnesses don't fit neatly into insurance company spreadsheets." When the formal presentation concluded, Marcus made his way to the speaker preparation room, a small conference space behind the main auditorium that was typically used for last-minute speech rehearsals and private meetings with conference organizers. Whitmore arrived 10 minutes later, having extracted himself from the networking obligations that typically followed keynote presentations. "Tell me about your daughter," Whitmore said without preamble, settling into one of the conference room chairs with the kind of focused attention that made Marcus understand how the man had built a billion-dollar company through attention to detail and willingness to address problems directly. Marcus opened his folder and spread Sofia's medical records across the conference table, creating a visual narrative of her condition that included photographs, test results, and Dr. Chen's letters explaining the urgency of her need for a transplant. He spoke about her diagnosis, their financial struggles, and the systematic insurance denials that had pushed their family toward bankruptcy, while Sofia's health continued to deteriorate. Whitmore studied the documents with the careful attention of someone accustomed to evaluating complex data, asking specific questions about Sofia's blood type, her current kidney function, and the medical criteria for transplant eligibility. His questions revealed familiarity with kidney disease that went beyond general medical knowledge, suggesting personal or professional experience with similar conditions. "You mentioned that she's not high enough on the transplant list to receive a kidney within her remaining timeline," Whitmore said, looking up from the medical records. "Have you explored living donor possibilities?" Marcus had anticipated this question and prepared his answer carefully, knowing that his response would determine whether the conversation moved toward the request he desperately needed to make. "We've tested family members, but I have early-stage polycystic kidney disease myself, and my ex-wife isn't a compatible blood type. We've registered with every donor matching service in the region and reached out through social media and community organizations, but haven't found anyone who's both compatible and willing to undergo the donation process." Whitmore nodded, his expression suggesting understanding of the challenges Marcus described. "Living donor kidney transplants have much better outcomes than cadaveric transplants, especially for pediatric patients. The surgery is relatively low risk for healthy donors, and the recovery time is typically 6 to 8 weeks. But finding someone willing to make that commitment for a child they don't know is obviously complicated." The conversation had reached the point where Marcus needed to either make his request or accept that the opportunity would pass without him having asked for what Sofia truly needed. He could continue discussing insurance industry problems and healthcare policy issues, maintaining the safe ground of abstract systemic criticism. Or he could risk everything by asking Alexander Whitmore to consider becoming Sofia's kidney donor. "Mr. Whitmore," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to request, "I've researched your background and discovered that your blood type is compatible with Sofia's needs. I know this is an extraordinary thing to ask, and I have no right to impose on your generosity, but I'm wondering if you would consider being tested as a potential living donor for my daughter." The silence that followed Marcus's request seemed to stretch longer than the few seconds it actually lasted. Whitmore's expression didn't change dramatically, but Marcus could see him processing the implications of what had just been asked. The CEO leaned back in his chair, his hands clasped in front of him, his gaze shifting between Sofia's photographs and Marcus's face. "You're asking me to undergo major surgery to save your daughter's life," Whitmore said finally, his tone neither dismissive nor encouraging, simply factual. "Yes," Marcus replied, seeing no benefit in qualifying or softening his request. "I'm asking you to consider it. I understand it's an enormous thing to ask, and I understand if your answer is no. But Sofia is running out of time, and you're the first potentially compatible donor we've found who might have the resources and flexibility to consider such a significant commitment." Whitmore picked up one of Sofia's photographs, a recent image that showed her smiling despite the evident effects of her illness. Her face was pale and slightly swollen from medications, but her eyes held the kind of bright intelligence that reminded viewers that behind the medical condition was a 7-year-old girl with dreams and potential that extended far beyond her current circumstances. "Tell me about Sofia as a person," Whitmore said, still studying the photograph. "Not her medical condition, but who she is, what she likes to do, what kind of future she's imagining for herself." Marcus smiled for the first time since entering the conference room, grateful for a chance to talk about his daughter as something more than a collection of symptoms and treatment protocols. He described Sofia's love of mathematics, her determination to master problems that challenged children twice her age, and her optimistic plans for activities she would pursue after receiving a transplant. He talked about her artwork, pages of crayon drawings that showed herself playing soccer and swimming. Activities that might not be possible even after successful transplant surgery, but that represented her refusal to let illness limit her imagination. He mentioned her kindness to other children in the hospital, the way she shared her art supplies, and helped younger patients with homework during long dialysis sessions. Most importantly, Marcus described Sofia's resilience, her ability to maintain hope and humor despite circumstances that would challenge adults with far more life experience. She rarely complained about her restricted diet, never protested the 3 weekly dialysis sessions that left her exhausted, and continued to believe that her situation would improve because the alternative was simply unacceptable to her 7-year-old understanding of how the world should work. Whitmore listened without interruption, occasionally nodding as Marcus painted a picture of a child whose medical crisis had revealed character strengths that impressed everyone who met her. When Marcus finished, the CEO sat quietly for several minutes, his attention focused on documents and photographs that told Sofia's story in clinical terms and personal details. "I need to discuss this with my family," Whitmore said eventually, "and I'll need to consult with my own physicians about whether I'm medically suitable for donation. This isn't a decision I can make impulsively, regardless of how urgent Sofia's situation might be." Marcus felt a surge of hope that he tried to control, recognizing that Whitmore's willingness to consider the request was significant, but not equivalent to agreement. "I understand completely. Dr. Chen at Valley Medical Center can provide additional information about the donation process and answer any medical questions you might have." Whitmore collected Sofia's photographs and medical documents, placing them in his briefcase with the careful attention he might give to important corporate contracts. "I'll need a few days to process this and have the necessary conversations. How can I reach you with my decision?" Marcus provided his contact information, including his work schedules and the times he would be available for phone calls. As they prepared to leave the conference room, Marcus felt compelled to make one final statement, something that acknowledged the magnitude of what he'd asked, while expressing gratitude for Whitmore's willingness to consider such an extraordinary request. "Mr. Whitmore, I want you to know that I understand what I'm asking of you. I know that kidney donation involves real medical risks and lifelong implications for your health and lifestyle. I would never ask this if Sofia weren't running out of alternatives, and I'll understand and respect whatever decision you make." Whitmore paused at the conference room door, his expression thoughtful. "Marcus, can I ask you something? If our positions were reversed, if my daughter needed a kidney and you were a potential donor, do you think you would consider making such a donation to save the child of a complete stranger?" The question caught Marcus off guard, forcing him to consider scenarios he'd never imagined from the perspective of potential donor rather than desperate parent. He thought about Sofia's condition, the terror of watching her health decline, and the lengths to which parental love had driven his own decisions over the past several months. "Yes," Marcus said without hesitation. "If I were healthy and compatible, and if I could save another child's life, I think I would want to help, especially after experiencing what we've been through with Sofia." Whitmore nodded, as if Marcus's answer had confirmed something he'd been considering. "That's what I thought you'd say. I'll be in touch within the next few days." After Whitmore left, Marcus remained in the conference room for several minutes, trying to process what had just occurred. He'd made his request, received a more positive response than he'd dared to hope for, and now faced the most difficult part of the entire process: waiting for someone else to make a decision that would determine his daughter's future. The bus ride back to the hospital took 45 minutes, giving Marcus time to consider how he would explain the day's events to Sofia without creating unrealistic expectations or false hope. She was too young to understand the full implications of living donor transplantation, but old enough to recognize when her father was particularly stressed or optimistic about potential developments in her treatment. Sofia was awake when Marcus arrived at her hospital room, working on a math workbook that one of the nurses had brought from the pediatric education program. She looked up when he entered, her face brightening with a kind of genuine happiness that made all of his sacrifices and struggles feel worthwhile. "Dad, look what I figured out," she said, holding up a page covered with multiplication problems that would challenge most fourth graders. "Mrs. Patterson showed me how to break down big numbers into smaller parts that are easier to multiply. It's like solving a puzzle." Marcus sat beside her bed, marveling at her ability to find joy in mathematical concepts while connected to dialysis equipment that performed the biological functions her kidneys could no longer manage. Her enthusiasm for learning had never diminished despite her illness, and her intellectual curiosity continued to impress teachers and medical staff who worked with pediatric patients. "That's fantastic, sweetheart," Marcus said, reviewing her work and noting the precision of her calculations. "You're getting so good at this that pretty soon you'll be teaching me how to solve these problems." Sofia giggled at the idea of teaching math to her father, then grew more serious as she studied his expression. "Dad, you look different today. Did something good happen?" Marcus considered his response carefully, wanting to share his cautious optimism without creating expectations that might not be fulfilled. "I met someone today who might be able to help us with your kidney situation. It's too early to know for sure, but he's going to think about whether he might be able to donate a kidney that would be compatible with your needs." Sofia's eyes widened with excitement, but also with the kind of understanding that came from months of experience with medical uncertainties and treatment possibilities that sometimes materialized and sometimes disappeared. "Is he a nice person? Does he have kids like me?" "He seems like a very nice person," Marcus replied truthfully. "And yes, he has a daughter who's about your age. I think that's part of why he's willing to consider helping us." Sofia nodded with the wisdom of a child who had learned to navigate adult conversations about her own mortality. "I hope he decides to help. But if he can't, that's okay too. Maybe someone else will want to share their kidney with me." Her resilience continued to amaze Marcus, the way she maintained hope while accepting uncertainty, the manner in which she processed information about her own condition without losing the essential optimism that defined her personality. She learned to live with the possibility that medical solutions might not work, treatments might fail, and adults might not be able to fix everything that was wrong in her world. But she'd also learned to appreciate moments of possibility, to find excitement in potential developments while maintaining emotional equilibrium if those possibilities didn't materialize. It was a sophisticated form of psychological survival that most adults never mastered, and Sofia had developed it by necessity before her 8th birthday. The next 3 days passed with agonizing slowness, each phone call and email notification causing Marcus to wonder if Alexander Whitmore had reached his decision. Marcus tried to maintain normal routines, working his delivery shifts and cleaning jobs while spending every available moment at the hospital with Sofia, but the weight of waiting for news that would determine his daughter's future made concentration difficult. Dr. Chen had called Whitmore's office to provide additional medical information about the donation process and had reported that the pharmaceutical CEO had asked thoughtful, detailed questions that suggested serious consideration rather than polite deflection. The nephrologist had also mentioned that Whitmore had requested information about Sofia's long-term prognosis after transplant, the kind of inquiry that indicated genuine investment in her outcome, rather than mere curiosity about the medical procedures involved. On Thursday afternoon, while Marcus was helping Sofia with homework during her dialysis session, his phone rang with a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was Alexander Whitmore, speaking with a kind of controlled emotion that suggested a difficult decision had been carefully made. "Marcus, I've spent the past 3 days discussing your request with my family and my physicians. I want you to know that this was not a decision I made lightly, and it required conversations with people who care about my health and well-being just as much as you care about Sofia's." Marcus felt his heart rate accelerate, recognizing that Whitmore's next words would either represent the answer to months of prayer or another door closing on Sofia's chances for survival. He gestured for Sofia to continue with her homework while he stepped into the hallway for privacy. "I've been tested for medical compatibility," Whitmore continued, "and my doctors have confirmed that I'm a suitable donor candidate. More importantly, after thinking about your situation and considering what I would want someone to do if Isabella needed a kidney, I've decided that I want to help Sofia." The next morning brought a flurry of activity that transformed Sofia's hospital room into a coordination center for what would become the most complex medical and logistical undertaking Marcus had ever experienced. Dr. Chen arrived with a team of transplant specialists who needed to begin the extensive evaluation process that would determine whether Alexander Whitmore was indeed a suitable donor and whether Sofia's current condition made her a viable transplant recipient. The medical evaluation process for living kidney donation involved dozens of tests, psychological assessments, and consultations that would typically take several weeks to complete. However, given Sofia's deteriorating condition and the urgency of her need for transplant, Dr. Chen had coordinated with Valley Medical Center's transplant team to compress the timeline without compromising the thoroughness of the evaluation process. Alexander Whitmore arrived at the hospital that afternoon accompanied by his personal physician and a stack of preliminary medical records that demonstrated his commitment to moving forward with the donation process. Marcus had expected to feel awkward during their first meeting since the conference, given the extraordinary nature of what Whitmore had agreed to consider, but the pharmaceutical CEO's manner was both professional and warmly personal. "I brought Isabella with me," Whitmore said, gesturing toward a girl who appeared to be slightly older than Sofia, with dark hair and the kind of serious expression that suggested familiarity with medical environments. "She wanted to meet Sofia and understand why this donation was important to our family." Isabella Whitmore possessed the poise of a child who had learned to navigate adult conversations about medical conditions and treatment options. Her own experience with chronic illness had given her insights into hospitalization routines and patient care that most children her age wouldn't possess. When she met Sofia, the connection between them was immediate and genuine, built on shared understanding of what it meant to have your life shaped by medical appointments and treatment protocols. "My dad told me about your kidney problems," Isabella said, settling into the chair beside Sofia's bed with the comfortable familiarity of someone accustomed to hospital visits. "I have something called juvenile arthritis, so I know about having to take medicine and see doctors all the time. It's really hard sometimes." Sofia nodded with the wisdom of shared experience, and within minutes the two girls were discussing the various aspects of chronic illness with the kind of matter-of-fact acceptance that impressed the adults listening to their conversation. They compared notes on hospital food, shared strategies for making dialysis and infusion sessions more tolerable, and discovered mutual interests in mathematics and science that transcended their medical situations. While the girls talked, Alexander Whitmore underwent the first phase of donor evaluation, a comprehensive physical examination that would assess his overall health and identify any conditions that might complicate surgery or recovery. The tests included blood work to confirm compatibility, imaging studies of his kidneys to evaluate their function and structure, and consultations with specialists who would participate in the transplant procedure. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, the transplant surgeon who would perform both the donor and recipient surgeries, explained the process to both families with the kind of detailed clarity that helped patients understand not just what would happen, but why each step was necessary for successful outcomes. Living donor kidney transplant involves two simultaneous surgeries, Dr. Morrison explained, using anatomical diagrams to illustrate the procedures. Mr. Whitmore's surgery will involve removing his left kidney through a minimally invasive laparoscopic procedure that typically takes 2 to 3 hours. Sofia's surgery will involve placing that kidney in her lower abdomen and connecting it to her blood vessels and bladder. The surgeon emphasized that both procedures were considered routine within the transplant surgery field, with success rates exceeding 95% for both donors and recipients when proper medical protocols were followed. The recovery timeline for donors typically involved 1 week of hospitalization, followed by 6 to 8 weeks of restricted activity before returning to normal routines. For Sofia, the recovery would be more complex, involving immunosuppressive medications that would prevent her body from rejecting the new kidney, along with ongoing monitoring to ensure the transplanted organ was functioning properly. However, successful transplant would eliminate her need for dialysis and allow her to return to many normal childhood activities that had been restricted by her kidney failure. Marcus found himself overwhelmed by the medical complexity of what was being planned, but also impressed by the coordination and expertise of the medical team that had assembled to make the transplant possible. Dr. Chen had worked with Valley Medical Center's transplant program to ensure that Sofia's case received priority scheduling, while Whitmore's personal physician had provided medical records that streamlined his evaluation process. More remarkably, Whitmore had arranged for his company's medical insurance to cover all costs associated with the transplant procedures, eliminating the financial barriers that had seemed insurmountable just days earlier. Meridian Pharmaceuticals. Employee health benefits included coverage for living organ donation, a benefit that Whitmore had personally advocated for after learning about families who couldn't afford the medical expenses associated with donation surgery. "I've seen too many cases where financial considerations prevented potentially life-saving donations," Whitmore explained to Marcus during a break in the medical evaluations. "When we designed our employee benefits package, I insisted on including coverage that would remove money as a factor in donation decisions." The psychological evaluation process proved to be as thorough as the medical assessments, with both Whitmore and Sofia meeting individually with specialists who needed to confirm that the donor understood the risks and was making an informed decision without coercion, while ensuring that the recipient was emotionally prepared for the complexities of post-transplant life. Dr. Sarah Kim, the transplant program's psychological specialist, spent an hour with Whitmore exploring his motivations for dialysis, his donation, and his understanding of the long-term implications of his decision. The evaluation was designed to identify any psychological factors that might complicate recovery or lead to donor regret after surgery. "What I'm looking for," Dr. Kim explained to Marcus after Whitmore's session, "is evidence that his decision is based on genuine altruism rather than guilt, obligation, or unrealistic expectations about the outcome. Donors who have clear, realistic motivations tend to have better psychological outcomes after surgery." Sofia's psychological evaluation focused on her understanding of what transplant would mean for her daily life, her willingness to comply with post-surgery medical requirements, and her emotional readiness to accept an organ from someone outside her family. The evaluation revealed her remarkable maturity and understanding of her medical situation, along with genuine gratitude toward Whitmore that was balanced by realistic expectations about recovery and long-term care. The medical evaluations continued for 3 days, with both Whitmore and Sofia undergoing increasingly specialized tests that would confirm their suitability for the transplant procedure. The results were consistently positive, showing that Whitmore was an ideal donor candidate with excellent kidney function and no underlying health conditions that would complicate surgery. Sofia's evaluation revealed that despite her deteriorating kidney function, she was otherwise healthy enough to undergo transplant surgery and had a high probability of successful recovery. Her small size actually worked in her favor, as Whitmore's kidney would provide more than adequate function for her body's needs while having room to grow as she matured. On Thursday afternoon, Dr. Morrison called both families together to review the evaluation results and discuss scheduling for the transplant surgery. The medical team had confirmed that both donor and recipient were suitable candidates, and Sofia's condition was stable enough to proceed with surgery within the next week. "I want to schedule the surgery for next Tuesday," Dr. Morrison announced, her tone reflecting both professional confidence and awareness of the significance of what was being planned. "Sofia's kidney function has stabilized at current levels, which gives us an optimal window for transplant. Waiting longer increases the risk of complications, while proceeding now maximizes our chances of excellent outcomes for both patients." Marcus felt a mixture of relief and terror at the definitive timeline, knowing that within a week his daughter would either receive the kidney that could save her life or face surgical complications that might make her condition worse. The medical team had emphasized that transplant surgery carried inherent risks, even under optimal circumstances, and that outcomes couldn't be guaranteed regardless of how thoroughly they had prepared. Whitmore's response to the surgery schedule was characteristically direct and practical. He arranged for his corporate responsibilities to be handled by his executive team during his recovery period, scheduled the time off work that would be necessary for both pre-surgery preparation and post-surgery healing, and coordinated with his family to ensure that Isabella's medical care would continue uninterrupted during his hospitalization. The weekend before surgery became a period of intense preparation that involved both medical protocols and personal arrangements that would support both families through the transplant process. Marcus had requested time off from both of his jobs, using sick leave and vacation time to ensure that he could be present for Sofia's surgery and recovery without financial penalties that might complicate their already precarious economic situation. Elena, Sofia's mother, had driven up from her new home in Phoenix after receiving Marcus's phone call about the planned transplant. Their divorce had been finalized months earlier, but their shared concern for Sofia's welfare had maintained a connection that transcended their personal conflicts. Elena's presence provided emotional support for Sofia while also helping Marcus navigate the complex logistics of pre-surgery preparation. "I can't believe someone would do this for Sofia," Elena said during one of their conversations in the hospital cafeteria. "When you told me about approaching Whitmore, I thought it was a desperate fantasy. I never imagined that he would actually agree to donate a kidney to a child he'd never met." Marcus understood Elena's amazement, having experienced similar disbelief when Whitmore had first agreed to consider donation. The decision represented a level of altruism that challenged conventional expectations about human behavior, particularly among wealthy executives who might be expected to prioritize their own interests over those of strangers. But spending time with Alexander Whitmore during the pre-surgery period had revealed aspects of his character that explained his willingness to take such extraordinary action. His experience with Isabella's chronic illness had given him profound understanding of what families faced when dealing with childhood medical crises, while his success in the pharmaceutical industry had provided him with resources and flexibility that made donation practically feasible. More importantly, Whitmore possessed a moral framework that extended beyond personal and family interests to embrace broader responsibilities toward human welfare. His criticism of insurance industry practices hadn't been abstract corporate positioning, but rather genuine conviction based on personal experience with healthcare systems that sometimes prioritized bureaucratic efficiency over patient outcomes. "I keep thinking about what would happen if Isabella needed a kidney," Whitmore had explained to Marcus during one of their pre-surgery conversations. "I would want someone to help her, even if that someone had no obligation to get involved. The fact that I can help Sofia means that I should help Sofia. It's really that simple." The simplicity of his reasoning masked the complexity of what he was undertaking. But Whitmore seemed genuinely unconcerned about the personal costs or medical risks associated with kidney donation. His research into the procedure had been thorough, his understanding of potential complications was realistic, and his commitment to following through with the surgery was unwavering. Sofia's preparation for surgery involved both medical protocols and emotional processing that helped her understand what would happen during and after the transplant procedure. Dr. Morrison had explained the surgery in age-appropriate terms that emphasized the positive outcomes while acknowledging that major surgery always involves some degree of risk and uncertainty. "The new kidney will be like getting a really good replacement part for your body," Dr. Morrison had told Sofia during one of their pre-surgery consultations. "Mr. Whitmore's kidney is healthy and strong, and it will do the job that your kidneys can't do anymore. You'll still need to take medicine to help your body accept the new kidney, but you won't need dialysis anymore, and you'll start feeling much stronger." Sofia's questions about the surgery revealed both her intellectual curiosity and her emotional maturity in processing information about her own medical care. She wanted to understand the technical aspects of how the new kidney would be connected to her body, how long the surgery would take, and what she could expect during her recovery period. More touchingly, she expressed concern about Alexander Whitmore's welfare, asking whether the donation surgery would hurt him and whether he would be able to return to normal activities after giving up one of his kidneys. Her empathy for her donor's sacrifice demonstrated the kind of emotional intelligence that had impressed everyone who worked with her throughout her illness. The night before surgery, both families gathered in Sofia's hospital room for a dinner that had been arranged by the hospital's family services department. The meal provided an opportunity for informal conversation that helped everyone process the significance of what would happen the following morning. Isabella and Sofia had developed a friendship over the past week that transcended their initial bond over shared medical experiences. They had discovered mutual interests in mathematics and science, along with similar ambitions for their futures that included careers in fields that might help other children dealing with chronic illnesses. "After I get better, I want to study medicine so I can help other kids who need kidney transplants," Sofia announced during dinner, her statement reflecting both gratitude for her own care and determination to contribute to helping others in similar situations. Isabella nodded with understanding. "I want to work in pharmaceutical research, developing better treatments for arthritis and other autoimmune conditions. My dad's company works on rare diseases, and I think there's so much more we could do to help people." Their conversation revealed the kind of mature thinking about purpose and contribution that often emerged from childhood experiences with serious illness. Both girls had learned lessons about resilience, compassion, and the importance of using personal experiences to benefit others that would shape their perspectives throughout their lives. Alexander Whitmore listened to the girls' plans with obvious pride in his daughter and genuine affection for Sofia, whose courage and optimism had impressed him throughout the pre-surgery period. His decision to donate a kidney had been motivated initially by parental empathy and moral conviction, but spending time with Sofia had transformed the abstract concept of helping a sick child into a personal investment in a specific young person's future. "Sofia, I want you to know that giving you one of my kidneys is one of the most important things I've ever done," Whitmore said during their dinner conversation. "Not just because it might help you get better, but because knowing you has reminded me about what's really important in life. Your strength and happiness despite everything you've been through has been inspiring to watch." Marcus felt overwhelmed by gratitude that extended beyond appreciation for the kidney donation itself to encompass recognition of the human connection that had developed between their families. Whitmore's generosity had provided more than a potential medical solution to Sofia's condition. It had created relationships and shared experiences that had enriched all of their lives regardless of surgical outcomes. Surgery day arrived with the kind of early morning activity that characterized major medical procedures, as both patients underwent final preparations that would ready them for operations that would begin simultaneously in adjacent operating rooms. Sofia's surgery would start first, with Dr. Morrison and her team preparing the recipient site, while Whitmore underwent the laparoscopic procedure that would remove his left kidney. The coordination required for dual surgeries involved teams of specialists who had trained extensively to manage the logistics of living donor transplantation. The timing had to be precise to minimize the time that Whitmore's kidneys spent outside of a human body, while ensuring that Sofia was ready to receive the organ as soon as it became available. Marcus and Elena waited together in the family area designated for transplant surgery, a space designed to provide comfort and privacy for families during the extended periods required for major organ transplant procedures. They were joined by Whitmore's wife Catherine and Isabella, creating an unusual gathering of two families whose lives had become intertwined through extraordinary circumstances. Catherine Whitmore was a gracious woman in her late 30s, who possessed the kind of quiet strength that had supported her husband's demanding career while managing Isabella's medical needs. Her initial reaction to Alexander's decision to donate a kidney had been concern for his welfare, but meeting Sofia had convinced her that the donation was both the right thing to do and consistent with the values that had shaped their marriage. When Alexander first told me about Sofia's situation, I was worried about the medical risks and the impact on our family. Catherine confided to Marcus during the early hours of waiting. But after meeting Sofia and understanding her situation, I realized that this was exactly the kind of thing that defines who we want to be as people. If we can help save a child's life, then we should do that, regardless of the personal cost. The surgery updates came every hour from operating room coordinators who provided information about both procedures without revealing details that might increase anxiety among waiting family members. Both surgeries were proceeding according to plan, with no complications or unexpected developments that would require changes to the established surgical protocols. At 11:30 in the morning, Dr. Morrison emerged from the operating area to announce that Whitmore's kidney had been successfully removed and was functioning perfectly in preparation for transplantation to Sofia. The donor surgery had gone smoothly, with no complications or concerns that would affect Whitmore's recovery or the viability of his kidney for transplant. "Mr. Whitmore is in recovery and doing very well," Dr. Morrison reported. "His kidney is healthy and functioning exactly as we hoped. We're now proceeding with Sofia's surgery, and I expect to have more news for you in about 2 hours." The final phase of waiting felt interminable, as both families processed the reality that Whitmore had successfully completed his part of the process and that Sofia's future now depended entirely on how well her body would accept and integrate his kidney. Transplant surgery always involved uncertainties that couldn't be eliminated through careful planning or medical expertise, and the success of the procedure wouldn't be confirmed until Sofia's recovery demonstrated that the new kidney was functioning properly. At 2:15 in the afternoon, Dr. Morrison returned with news that transformed the waiting area into a celebration of successful surgery and new possibilities for Sofia's future. The transplant had been completed without complications, Sofia was stable in recovery, and initial indicators suggested that Whitmore's kidney was functioning perfectly in its new location. The surgery couldn't have gone better, Dr. Morrison announced, her exhaustion evident but her satisfaction unmistakable. Sofia's body has accepted the new kidney beautifully, and we're already seeing evidence of improved function. She should be awake within the next hour, and we expect a full recovery with excellent long-term outcomes. Marcus felt relief so profound that he needed to sit down to process the information that his daughter's life had been saved through the generosity of a man who had been a complete stranger just 2 weeks earlier. The months of worry, the financial struggles, and the desperate search for solutions had culminated in successful surgery that would allow Sofia to grow up with the kidney function she needed for a normal, healthy life. Elena burst into tears of gratitude and relief, her emotional response reflecting the strain of watching their daughter's health deteriorate while feeling helpless to provide the medical intervention she needed. The successful transplant represented not just Sofia's salvation, but also validation that their persistence in seeking alternative solutions had ultimately led to the outcome they had prayed for throughout her illness. Catherine Whitmore's reaction was more subdued but equally profound, as she processed the reality that her husband's decision to undergo major surgery for the sake of a stranger's child had resulted in successful outcomes for everyone involved. Alexander's generosity had saved Sofia's life while also demonstrating principles of human compassion that would influence Isabella's understanding of moral responsibility throughout her own life. The recovery period that followed surgery would test both families' patience and resilience, as Sofia and Alexander Whitmore navigated the complex process of healing from major surgery while their bodies adapted to the physiological changes that resulted from transplantation and organ donation. But for now, in the immediate aftermath of successful surgery, there was only gratitude and hope for the future that had been made possible by one father's willingness to risk everything to save another father's child. The bond that had been forged between their families through this experience would endure long beyond the medical aspects of transplantation, creating relationships and shared understanding that would enrich all of their lives for years to come. Sofia's recovery would be the beginning of a new chapter in her life, one made possible by the extraordinary generosity of a man who had chosen compassion over caution and human connection over personal safety. As Marcus sat in the recovery room watching Sofia sleep peacefully for the first time in months, without the mechanical assistance of dialysis equipment, he understood that Alexander Whitmore's gift had provided more than just a kidney. It had restored his faith in human goodness, demonstrated the power of persistence in the face of impossible circumstances, and created a legacy of generosity that would influence how Sofia understood her own responsibilities to help others throughout her life. The weeks that followed surgery would bring new challenges, as both patients navigated recovery processes that required patience, medical compliance, and family support that extended far beyond the immediate postoperative period. But those challenges would be faced with the confidence that comes from knowing that sometimes, when everything seems hopeless, extraordinary people emerge to provide exactly the help that desperate situations require. Alexander Whitmore had given Sofia more than a kidney. He had given her a future, and in doing so had demonstrated the kind of human connection that makes life meaningful regardless of the personal costs involved. The sacrifice had indeed created an unbreakable bond, one that would influence both families for generations to come. 3 years after the transplant, Marcus stood in the auditorium of Sofia's elementary school, watching his daughter deliver a presentation about kidney donation to her 5th-grade class. She spoke with confidence about her experience, explaining how a stranger's generosity had saved her life and changed everything for their family. "Mr. Whitmore didn't know me when he decided to give me his kidney," Sofia told her classmates. "But he did it anyway because he believed that helping people was more important than keeping himself completely safe. That taught me that we should always try to help others when we can." The recovery had been challenging but successful. Sofia's new kidney functioned perfectly, eliminating her need for dialysis and allowing her to return to normal childhood activities. She played soccer now, swam competitively, and maintained grades that reflected her exceptional mathematical abilities. The immunosuppressive medications she would take for life were a small price for the freedom her transplant had provided. Alexander Whitmore had recovered completely from his donation surgery, returning to work after 6 weeks with no long-term complications. His relationship with Sofia and Marcus had evolved into genuine friendship, with regular visits and shared celebrations that strengthened the bond created by their extraordinary circumstances. Meridian Pharmaceuticals had established a patient advocacy program inspired by Whitmore's experience with Sofia's case, providing resources and support for families navigating insurance denials and treatment access issues. The program had helped dozens of families secure coverage for life-saving treatments, transforming Whitmore's personal act of generosity into systematic change that benefited countless patients. Marcus had used his settlement from a lawsuit against his former insurance company to establish a small foundation that connected potential living donors with patients who needed transplants. The organization had facilitated 12 successful kidney donations in its first 2 years, proving that individual acts of compassion could multiply into broader networks of mutual support. Elena had moved back to the city after Sofia's transplant, recognizing that their daughter's recovery had healed wounds in their family that extended beyond medical problems. She and Marcus had rebuilt their relationship around shared commitment to Sofia's well-being and mutual appreciation for the second chance they had been given. The friendship between Sofia and Isabella had deepened over the years, with both girls pursuing academic excellence while maintaining awareness that their experiences with illness had given them perspectives and responsibilities that would shape their futures. They spent summers together at science camps and mathematics programs, encouraging each other's intellectual development while processing the ways their medical experiences had influenced their ambitions. Sofia's presentation concluded with a reflection on gratitude and responsibility that impressed both her teacher and the visiting parents who had come to hear her speak. "Having someone save your life makes you want to spend that life helping other people," she said. "Mr. Whitmore gave me more than just a kidney. He gave me an example of how to be a good person." After the presentation, Marcus and Alexander sat together in the school cafeteria, watching their daughters collaborate on a science project that combined Sofia's mathematical skills with Isabella's research abilities. The easy friendship between the girls reflected the deep connection their families had maintained since the transplant surgery. "Do you ever regret your decision to donate?" Marcus asked, a question he had wondered about but never felt comfortable asking during the more difficult periods of Sofia's recovery. Alexander shook his head without hesitation. "Never. Watching Sofia grow into the person she's becoming has been one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. Knowing that my kidney is helping her pursue her dreams makes every moment of recovery worth it." Their conversation was interrupted by Sofia and Isabella, who approached with excitement about their science fair project exploring the mathematical models used in organ donation matching. The girls had combined Sofia's intuitive understanding of transplant medicine with Isabella's research into pharmaceutical development, creating a presentation that impressed both their teachers and their parents. "We want to show other kids that science and mathematics can be used to solve real problems that affect people's lives," Isabella explained. "Our project demonstrates how algorithms help match donors with recipients, and how that matching process has improved over time." Sofia added, "We also want to encourage more people to consider becoming organ donors, because we've learned that there are never enough organs available for all the patients who need transplants." Their project reflected the kind of mature thinking about social responsibility that had developed from their experiences with serious illness and successful treatment. Both girls understood that their recovery and health were gifts that came with obligations to contribute to solutions that would benefit others facing similar challenges. The science fair presentation earned first place in their division, but more importantly, it generated conversations among other students and parents about organ donation and the importance of medical research. Sofia and Isabella had transformed their personal experiences into educational opportunities that might influence other families to consider donation or support medical innovation. As the school year concluded, both families began planning a summer celebration to mark the 3rd anniversary of Sofia's transplant. The gathering would include extended family members, medical team members who had participated in the surgery, and other families who had been helped by the advocacy programs that had emerged from their experience. Dr. Chen and Dr. Morrison had agreed to attend, along with several nurses and support staff who had worked with Sofia throughout her treatment and recovery. Their presence would acknowledge the collaborative effort that had made successful transplantation possible, while celebrating the long-term outcomes that validated everyone's investment in Sofia's care. Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point, from the desperate search for kidney donors to the successful surgery and recovery that had given Sofia the healthy future she deserved. The experience had taught him lessons about persistence, courage, and human compassion that had fundamentally changed his understanding of what people could accomplish when they chose to help each other. Alexander Whitmore's decision to donate a kidney had saved Sofia's life. But the impact of his generosity extended far beyond that single medical intervention. His example had inspired changes in corporate policies, advocacy programs, and individual attitudes that would benefit patients and families for generations to come. The bond created by their shared experience had indeed proven unbreakable, connecting two families through relationships that would endure throughout their lifetimes. Sofia's recovery was complete, her future bright with possibilities that had been made real by one man's willingness to sacrifice for a stranger's child. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.